Vamos a estar viendo el video de Critical Drinker, que él estará hablando con respecto a Lara Croft de Tomb Raider. Normalmente cuando él habla, él no tiene cosas buenas que decir de los shows y las cosas. Porque él habla es para golpearlos, bro. Vamos a ver qué él dice.
So, you may have noticed that I've been away for a week or so, doing my best to drink every bar in New England dry, and generally having a delightful time away from YouTube. But hey, all good things have got to come to an end, and in my case, they ended on the flight home, where I decided to kill some time by firing up Netflix and watching a few episodes of Tomb Raider, The Legend of Lara Croft. I mean, really, when you've got a smoking hot, kick-ass woman as your main character, action, adventure, and exotic locations, how can you really go wrong?
What face is that?
My thinking one.
Oh boy.
Jesus wept. Honestly, apart from the god-awful Resident Evil series that I'm still having therapy for, I don't think I've seen any show misuse its source material in such spectacular fashion before.
Ese no es Lara
Tomb Raider
Croft
is
que
a
no está
fucking
acostumbrado a ver. ¿Qué es lo que está
embarrassment that shames the
pasando
very
aquí?
name of Lara Croft, sacrifices character and story integrity to work in all the tedious and cringy tropes of modern writing.
Y una cosa, yo estoy viendo el video, pero yo he sido prácticamente fanático de Lara Croft. No hace mucho tiempo, yo tengo muchísimos videojuegos que la tengo a ella ahí. Pero en los nuevos la han ido modificando demasiado, que no se ve como si fuera ella y cosas así, entonces es un lío. Yo tengo dos juegos de los modernos de ella. Y no, el uno de ellos. El último yo no lo compré porque el penúltimo como que no era ella, porque yo hubiese jugado donde estaba el reboot de Lara Croft. Cuando hicieron la franquicia de nuevo y comenzaron desde cero, que ella se perdió en una isla porque el barco se desbarató y todas esas cuestiones. Eso fue un buen reboot. El segundo como que le cambiaron la cara y toda la cuestión. Uno está diciendo, bro, ven acá. Pero esa no es la misma muchacha con la cual yo estaba jugando hace un par de años atrás. Porque ya uno se acostumbra a la misma persona y no quiere como seguir el mismo ritmo, pero hicieron variaciones. Y eso yo lo compré y yo nada más jugué como algún 20 minutos y lo dejé ahí. No sé si algún día le ponga la mano, pero está ahí. Yo no le he hecho caso a eso porque me cambiaron a la muchacha. Entonces hay muchos descuadres, muchas cuestiones que están haciendo estos desarrolladores, cosas así. Pero yo me acuerdo que yo vi también la película, yo he visto donde está Georgina Jolie de Lara Croft y son nítidas, son bien. Algunas cosas chistosas aquí y allí como que no cuadran, pero son tolerables y uno se divierte. En la última, la película que decían que cambiaron a la muchacha y no sé ni quién es ella, la cambiaron y yo estaba viendo y tuve que ella intenta salir como de una isla, hay un grupo de matones y todas esas cuestiones. Y tuve que ella acaba con uno de ellos. Y ellos coge, yo creo que fue el arco y la flecha y dejó una ametralladora ahí. Desde que tuve que dejar la ametralladora y no la cogen, tú sabes que hay algo malo en la escritura de la película. Hay algo malo en el libreto. Desde que no cogen la ametralladora. Entonces esas cosas que hacen que uno se eche para atrás. Acá esto no tiene lógica. Está bien, coge tu arco y tu flecha. Con tu ametralladora también, porque es más práctica. Es práctica cogerla. Entonces desde ahí yo creo que yo dejé de ver esa película.
Wastes its talented voice cast on clunky dialogue and rams it all home with shitty animation that looks about 20 years out of date. In short, it's a boring and pandering.
Hay mucha gente como que le cae encima a la animación. Si se ve decente y fluye decentemente la animación, no tiene que ser lo último, lo mejor que hay. Porque ellos están tratando de mostrar una historia a través de la animación. Entonces yo no me quejo tanto porque yo sé que eso cuesta hacer esas animaciones. Y a mí no me molesta mucho, siempre y cuando el libreto esté bien.
Mess that proves once again why Lara Croft absolutely cannot be adapted for modern audiences. Anyway, grab your sports bra and wildly impractical bow and arrow that's far less efficient than a gun, and let's get the plot summary over with. So the show kicks off with a young, relatively green Lara on a mission in Chile to recover an ancient puzzle box artifact. And for the first few minutes, things seem to be going relatively well. There's all the usual Tomb Raider hallmarks you'd expect, plenty of traps, dangerous wildlife, death-defying leaps of faith, and a few bad guys to spice things up. Lara duly finds the box and hands it off to her mentor, Roth, only for more baddies to show up, forcing Roth to kill them. I love how Lara acts all shocked when she sees this. Like, Jesus, these guys were trying to kill you a few minutes ago. What the fuck did you think was going to happen when they caught up to you? Anyway, flash forward 3 years or so, and we're introduced to a much tougher and more experienced Lara, who for some reason is having a fist fight with a woman in a lucha libre mask. And at that moment, I knew that this show was fucked. See, I get why they did this. They wanted to show the audience how much of a tough, tenacious fighter Lara is now, taking a beating but refusing to back down against a superior opponent, and how she's no longer the naive young woman that we saw in the intro. That's nice and all, but the thing is, it completely misunderstands the essence of her character. Lara Croft isn't some lumbering brawler who gets into bare-knuckle boxing matches for
ella es ágil, agilidad sí tiene, y hay una rebelde de por sí. Es esa Lara Croft, rebeldía y agilidad haciendo sus cosas. A ella le gusta explorar, buscar cosas. Es verdad, lo de ella no es pelear así, cuerpo a cuerpo, mostrando quién es más fuerte. Porque eso tiene sus personas y esa no es ella realmente.
She's an adventurer, not a fighter, and she doesn't have to prove herself to anyone. The thrill for her is exploring the unknown, finding the unfindable, overcoming obstacles, and outthinking traps and enemies. Yeah, she'll defend herself when she has to, but in that case, she's more likely to resort to guns than fists.
Exactamente. Por eso que yo me puse en cuerda con la película, con el reboot de la película. Esa es la última película después de Georgina Jolie, la otra muchacha nueva. Coge las cosas que sean más prácticas. Tú no tienes que luchar o coger flechas. Yo entiendo que tú coges la flecha y el arco para ser sigilosa, pero cuando ya te están viendo normal, es mejor tener el AK-47 en la mano. Desde que dejan el arma, esto no tiene lógica, porque en la vida real, cualquier persona tratando de salir de un lugar difícil, donde la tengan ratada o lo que sea, y ven un arma cargada, la van a coger. No se van a ir desarmados por ahí para tener dificultades después para pelear contra los hombres o las personas que la tengan. Hay que ser realístico también. Aunque pongan sus cosas que no tengan sentido de vez en cuando, pero en esas cuestiones sí.
Big or strong to hold their own against bigger opponents. But oh well, whatever. Pretty soon she's contacted by non-threatening male sidekick number 1 and told to stop moping around and come home because apparently her little group of super friends just can't live without her. So she comes home to Croft Manor and runs into non-threatening male sidekick number 2, who's an absolute fanny with a personality more irritating than a sandpaper condom. And after more moping around, she decides to donate all her family treasures to a museum because she thinks it'll help her move on or something. I literally cannot understand how they expect to reconcile this version of Lara with the one in the original game, which canonically is due to happen shortly after the events of this show. Anyway, whatever. The point is that after going off alone to mope around some more, Lara spots a thief who steals the puzzle box from the start of the episodes. And in the 3 years that she's had this thing, she's never once tried to open it. Anyway, this is our main baddie, Charles, who's out to take revenge against the secret society who murdered his dad. And the way he plans to do this is to recover 4 ancient artifacts that have been scattered across the globe, bringing them all together and then using them...
Es el avatar de Laser Bender, buscando tierra, aire, fuego, agua. Eso es lo que se ve en los 4 elementos.
Blow up the world or something. I don't really know, man. The methadone was kicking in pretty hard by that point, so I was tuning out towards the end. Anyway, for the most part, it's your standard Tomb Raider setup. We've got a bad guy trying to unleash powers beyond his control, so Lara has to travel around the world in a race against time to recover the 4 pieces before Charles does. I say, old boy, this calls for some hardcore moping. not to mention the classic staples of all good Tomb Raider games: interpersonal dramas, daddy issues, a good bit of crying, and a possible lesbian relationship. Oh yeah, Lara's gay now, by the way, or at least as heavily implied as the writers could possibly get away with, because heterosexual relationships in modern entertainment are rarer than female apologies these days. You know when you construct an image of a showrunner for something like this, and you keep telling yourself, nah, that's just a cliche, they can't possibly look like that. Well, there you go. Now, there's a lot of things to criticise about this show, but by far the biggest one is the fucking protagonists. And what's so annoying for me is that the path to success was practically laid out for them. This show actually had the potential to be a neat bridge between the rebooted prequel trilogy and the classic original games that follow on from them, finally giving us a Lara who's more in step with the version that we all know and love.
Are you serious?
Nope. Instead, we're stuck with the same mopey, weepy, emotionally fragile wet rag that we've been dragging around for 3 increasingly tedious games. The only difference now is that she's swapped one dead father figure for another one to feel sad about, putting her in exactly the same position as before and accomplishing absolutely nothing.
Fuck.
You know, for a show that's supposedly all about female empowerment, it's kind of weird that it insists on making its protagonist beholden to men at all times. Why does everyone insist on sucking the fun out of a protagonist like Lara Croft when she's literally the easiest character in the world to write? She's an adventurer who takes on jobs because it's fun. She likes the challenge. She loves travel and history and finding lost treasure. She was designed to be a female Indiana Jones with a touch of James Bond sophistication thrown in, and that's why she works so fucking well. She wasn't really a character that we were supposed to know intimately. She was more of an icon, an archetype who was compelling precisely because of what we didn't know about her. It gave her a mystique that teased little bits of information but always left you wanting more. It's not rocket science, but the more layers of narrative complexity and cliched backstory they've tried to heap on her over the years, the more they've polluted the simple elegance of her original archetype. I don't want Lara Croft to be tied down by constant guilt and fun-killing self-doubt, or surrounded by a bunch of naggy friends who do half the work for her and are constantly having to push her forward against her will. The Lara Croft that I grew up with was a loner by choice.
¿Verdad? Ellos la están humanizando demasiado y por consecuencia la están haciendo mucho menos impresionante de lo que ella es. Es verdad.
Because she didn't need other people to validate her own existence. She only had herself to rely on, and that was enough. And it's not like we're dealing with the A-team here either. Jonah's a big affable buffoon who exists only to support everything that Lara says and does. Camilla's inserted purely so the writers can have a will they won't they relationship with Lara, and Zip makes me want to punch right through my TV screen every time he shows up. The guy is simply insufferable. He's about as funny as a bridesmaid's speech, and the decision to make him as campily, flamboyantly gay as possible undermines what could have been a perfectly good aspect of his character if it was handled with more subtlety than a rainbow-coloured chainsaw. Why do you have to reduce guys like him into the most tedious stereotypes imaginable? Charles had a tiny bit of potential to act as a decent foil for Lara by morphing into a villain that's more complex than he seems at first, and there's a clumsy attempt to parallel their different ways of dealing with personal loss, but it never gets going because his character is so melodramatic and weighed down by clunky dialogue that you just can't take him seriously. And I've got nothing against the voice actors here. Richard Armitage and Hayley Atwell both do their best with their horrendous material, but man, even the best actors in the world can't elevate this shit. Even the animation looks like garbage, trying to replicate the style of 80s and 90s cartoons, and there's a weird jerky quality to the character movements that make them look stiff and robotic. Lara's character design swings wildly between slender and borderline feminine and bulked up and butch with absolutely no explanation, like she was being worked on by completely different creative teams with their own takes on the character. And the thing is, that animation approach made sense in something like Masters of the Universe because it was directly trying to tie into the original 1980s cartoon, but here it just feels like some weird callback to a previous show that never existed.
Skeleton.
I mean, I know the Tomb Raider games started in the 90s, but man, that's a pretty tenuous link. Shows like Arcane proved what can be done with modern animation technology, and it really feels like Tomb Raider could have benefited from a more mature style like that. Ultimately, the legend of Lara Croft managed to fumble the ball in the worst way possible, somehow turning Lara Croft into someone we don't want to go on an adventure with. And if you've got any love for the character at all, you'd do best to remember her as she was and give this turd a wide berth. Believe me, it is not worth your time. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Go away now. So,
Así son las cosas. Bueno, la cuestión es que ellos siguen siempre haciendo la franquicia una y otra vez, una y otra vez, y una y otra vez. Y es por reconocimiento de propiedad intelectual. Y aunque a uno no le gusta que estén dañando tanto el carácter que a uno le gusta, uno sabe que ellos hacen más dinero haciéndose carácter, aunque lo hagan bien o lo hagan mal, que haciendo una película o una serie totalmente nueva de un carácter que nadie conoce. Porque que nadie conoce, muchas veces nadie lo ve. Pero aunque sea una relación de amor y odio, uno lo ve. Entonces eso es lo que ellos están buscando. Tal vez ellos vuelven y lo reinician de nuevo y tal vez lo hacen con un libreto bueno la otra vez y después lo hacen con uno malo y así que sí se mantienen. Cuestiones de negocios. Cuestiones de negocios. Bueno.